During the Second World War, the Nazis, under the guise of the conflict, conducted horrific and sadistic crimes against humanity. As the Allies and the Red Army advanced towards Germany, they entered Nazi-occupied territories and came across a number of huge concentration camps. Here the true horrors of Hitler's regime were uncovered. The British, for example, when they liberated Bergen-Belsen, were greeted by thousands of corpses littered around the camp, along with thousands of emaciated prisoners who were clinging on to life and suffering heavily from a typhus epidemic. It was the Red Army who discovered Auschwitz and liberated the camp after many of the SS guards had fled and left the prisoners to fend for themselves. The prisoners they liberated told of the suffering they had been subject to, and one of the most shocking accounts from Auschwitz was the brutality of the guards. One such brutal Nazi was Maximilian Grabner, a chief within the Gestapo who inflicted barbarism onto the prisoners inside the infamous torture chamber, Block 11. Join us today as we look at the justified execution of Maximilian Grabner, the Torturer of Auschwitz, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Maximilian Grabner was born on October 2nd, 1905 in Vienna, Austria, and he had a simple upbringing. His schooling was straightforward and not out of the ordinary, and in the 1920s he began working as a lumberjack in the forests. He then, in his early 20s, sought a different career, and he looked into the prospect of becoming a police officer. Grabner embarked upon the short training course, and in 1930, at the age of around 25, he was accepted into the Austrian police. He rose throughout the ranks, working as an officer, but also a criminal investigator in Vienna. However, within Austria at the time, there was a growing amount of sympathy for the Nazi cause, which was growing itself within Germany. Grabner joined the Nazi Party in around August 1932, even before Hitler seized power in Germany. The Nazi Party in Austria at the time was considered illegal, which makes it strange that someone working for the police would knowingly risk their jobs to join the group. This shows what Grabner's political ideology and his outlook on the world must truly have been. After Austria was annexed into the German Empire, Grabner joined the SS at the beginning of September 1938. Within the infamous organisation, he rose to the rank of an SS Untersturmführer. As the Second World War broke out, Maximilian Grabner worked in Katowice, which too had been brought into the Third Reich. There in 1939, he worked as a criminal secretary at the State Police Office. However, he quickly rose throughout the ranks and became the head of the political department in the local area. Within his new jurisdiction was Auschwitz concentration camp, which had been established within his police district. This led him into Auschwitz, and within the camp he was forced to obey the camp commandant's rules, but he was a high-ranking member of the Gestapo. Within Auschwitz, his main jobs consisted of dealing with resistance within the camp, ensuring that this was dealt with swiftly, and also preventing escapes and contact with the outside world. He was also tasked with managing files and correspondence with the camp and the Gestapo, and also the criminal police and the Reich Security main office. Grabner began to develop a reputation of being a brutal and sadistic man, and was given the nickname Lord God of Auschwitz. His duties were carried out with cruelty and barbarism, and he would throw prisoners into Block 11 at the camp. Here they would be brutally tortured in different ways. Found within Block 11 were the 4 standing cells, in which prisoners were forced to stand in one position for days on end, being locked in one specific position. Also next to the 10th and 11th block was the famous death wall, in which thousands of the prisoners were lined up and executed by a firing squad. It would have been Grabner who oversaw the interrogations of prisoners, the torture of the prisoners, and finally their executions, in his role as the Gestapo head of Auschwitz. It was within Block 11 that the first attempts to use Zyklon B at Auschwitz were tried in September 1941. Grabner was also involved in bunker emptying, in which he and the head of the protective custody camp would conduct inspections of the bunkers, and during these they dragged random prisoners out of the bunker and then shot them in cold blood. It's clear that Grabner took great joy in causing maximum suffering to the prisoners of Auschwitz, and he was a greatly feared individual. For his work he was awarded a second class with swords, which suggests he took part in executions and mass exterminations. It was said that he gave speeches to reassure Jews at the crematoriums, lying to them before their impending death occurred, and he took part in ordering them to undress before the gassings took place. Maximilian Grabner was forced out of his job as the head of the political department in Auschwitz on November 30th, 1943, and he was arrested. Grabner, along with other members of staff at the camp, were investigated for corruption and crimes, and a court case was opened up against him. He was accused of arbitrarily shooting 2,000 prisoners who had not received execution orders or death warrants. For this, along with theft, the prosecutor requested a prison sentence of 12 years. However, the head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Müller, just postponed the trial and sentencing, to the point where it was never carried out. He did go back to the Gestapo. However, at the end of the Second World War, he tried to evade capture. Grabner was working as a servant on a farm near to Vienna, but he was arrested on August 4th, 1945, and was taken into Soviet custody. His arrest was carried out by a group investigating war criminals in the Vienna area, and after his arrest he was interrogated. He was perceived to have been a wailing man who would regularly burst into tears, and also a man who was a coward. He stated whilst in custody, "I was only participating in the murder of 3 million people out of consideration for my family. I was never an anti-Semite." With this, he used the old excuse that the Nazis had for committing their crimes, that they were simply only following orders, but this defence was never accepted. Interestingly, whilst being imprisoned, he was also watched very carefully, and during a routine inspection, escape materials were found. It was considered that Grabner was trying to plan a breakout from his cell, but before he did this he was placed on trial after being extradited to Poland. He was handed over to the Polish and placed on trial at the Auschwitz Trial. This began on November 24th, 1947, and focused on bringing those defendants who participated in crimes at Auschwitz to justice. Along with former Commandant Arthur Lieber-Henschel, Maximilian Grabner was hauled to the dock and was considered defendant number 3 due to his high position in the Gestapo. Evidence was heard during the trial, but Grabner was found guilty of his crimes and was sentenced to death. It was said during sentencing that torturing of prisoners already tormented to the extremes is the evidence of inhumane savagery perpetrated by those defendants who, as a result of the trial, have been sentenced to death. On January 24th, 1948, in a prison in Krakow, Maximilian Grabner, along with a number of other condemned at the Auschwitz trial, was executed. The execution chamber inside Krakow prison was not one which was sophisticated. It was simply a number of ropes hanging from the ceiling. Grabner was hanged without a long drop, after the noose was placed around his neck. He simply made his way up onto a small stool. The noose was placed around his neck, with a bag on his head, and the stool was then kicked from underneath him. It would have taken him a long while to die, slowly suffocating over a period of up to 30 minutes, and we don't know what his last words were. Maximilian Grabner tried to admit that during his reign of terror over Auschwitz, he was in fact not driven by anti-Semitic values that the SS upheld, and he tried to claim that he was only following orders. This clearly was not acceptable, and through his reputation within the camp, it's clear that he imposed a significant reign of terror onto the prisoners, especially those who were tortured for information by Grabner, either beaten savagely or confined to the small standing cells. He was a brutal man who seemed to take great pride in his sadistic work that he was completing, and for this he is a man who deserved to die. His execution for his role in the Holocaust was a justified one. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.